Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And yesterday, Neville Ray presented at the Wells Fargo conference, and so did Verizon CTO. Actually, Verizon CTO went first, and then after, Neville Ray presented. Now, just a few takeaways, and I mentioned this in the video I made yesterday. What T-Mobile presented, and now that we have an idea that Neville is not really into small cells that big, Verizon is going the completely opposite direction versus T-Mobile. And Verizon CTO made that very, very clear in his presentation and remarks yesterday. And as you can see by the title, Verizon in a millimeter wave groove. So they are taking that technology very, very serious. I know a lot of people have questioned that technology. They said the range is not good. Indoors penetration is not there. You get in between any obstruction, leaf, trees, it doesn't work. That's what people have been saying over the last few years as Verizon has been buying the spectrum and incorporating it into their network, starting with the home internet when they launched it first, and then they went for commercial mobile use. Now, the numbers are staggering, I think. Neville Ray says he doesn't want to go beyond the 50,000 small cells that he thinks he will need. He has 70,000 plus now on the network. He says he has more than he needs, more than he knows what to do with. Most of that comes from the Sprint side. There's a lot of overlapping coverage on that, so he'll likely decommission all of the Sprint ones. Verizon is going full throttle on small cells, and they have two kinds of small cells. So you have to look at it on both sides. So when they say millimeter wave nodes, they mean millimeter wave nodes only. So by the end of this year, and Verizon CTO said they are ahead of target a little bit, so that I think they get there. By the end of this year, they had a targeted deployment of 14,000 millimeter wave nodes to be deployed by the end of this year. That would put them at a total of 30,000 millimeter wave nodes deployed throughout the US. He said at this meeting yesterday, and I will leave this article in the description down below so you guys can read it in its entirety. He says they want to maintain that volume of millimeter wave nodes, the 14,000, for the next few years. So to kind of put that in perspective, T-Mobile wants to be at a total number of 50,000 throughout their entire network. It seems that they don't really want to go beyond that, at least how it stands now. If Verizon does one more year of small cells at a good pace and gets to that 14,000 by the end of next year, they'll have rolled out almost on just millimeter wave nodes what T-Mobile wants to do on the entire network. So that'll put them at about 44,000 millimeter wave nodes deployed throughout the US. They do that in 23, they'll be way over that total that T-Mobile wants to deploy. And that doesn't even include the LTE and CBRS small cells that are out there from Verizon. So they'll be at a much more volume, much bigger volume of small cells than T-Mobile will even get any close to. We're talking potentially 100,000 plus millimeter wave nodes being deployed for Verizon, let's say by 2025, 2026, if they maintain that volume. So I think that's massive. That shows you that both companies are going completely different directions. I think the company in the middle is going to be AT&T, and I think AT&T is going to mimic Verizon on the deployment in terms of millimeter wave. AT&T is not has not gone as aggressive as what Verizon is doing, but eventually AT&T they'll get there. They'll be somewhat at a similar deployment to Verizon. With T-Mobile, I don't know what they do. They talk about millimeter wave, but they don't really aggressively deploy it. They talk about it a lot, but when it'll actually be deployed and what those small cells look like, is it mainly macros that they put millimeter wave on? That remains to be seen. They think their grid, they have the densest macro grid. I don't, even a half a mile apart. If the sites are half a mile apart, that's going to be even, that's going to be tough for millimeter wave to have somewhat continuous coverage. It's going to be very tough with millimeter wave small cells. If the municipality allows you can build them 2,000 feet apart. In this case, with the macros, it's kind of tough to gain any continuous coverage if the sites are half a mile apart. So that's pretty much what he was talking about. Of course, C-band was a very important topic. He says it's taken a lot of priority, but he says they don't have to do any reprioritizing because they're spending money. So the 18.5 billion, which is the high end of their capex, he says he can use that to deploy everything that they have already been doing at the same pace, if not faster. That includes the fiber deployments, the millimeter wave, more density, new macros, whatever they need. In-building solutions. That fund, that 17.5 to 18.5 billion, can more than adequately cover that all. That extra 10 billion that they're investing is to accelerate that C-band deployment. So like they said earlier in the year, he can use that money however fast he can deploy that equipment. That's, if you really sit back and think about that, that's big. That's really big. No carrier has ever deployed equipment or had the green light and approval to deploy the equipment and assets at that rate if need be. Most of them set the capex, and that's kind of what you're going to spend that year. But if Verizon CTO has a good year this year and they tell him, hey, look, this is what we got approval for all this. Do we have the approval to deploy? Do we have equipment ready to be purchased? And if that means them spending 3-4 billion, 5 billion this year on C-band, then so be it. That's what that funding is for. It can be spent as fast as they can deploy it. So it's just very interesting that both companies, between Verizon and T-Mobile, differ so heavily in the way they approach this 5G deployment. Neville says small cells are not a big deal for his network. Says he has too many as it is. Verizon says we don't have enough. We need to build more. And of course, that a lot of that has to do with the physics and characteristics surrounding millimeter wave. It's not going to reach a mile or 2 or 3. So that in itself, if you just do very basic math, you're going to come to the conclusion that they're going to have to build much more small cells to make that somewhat of continuous coverage, especially if they want to have 50 to 70% of the traffic in urban environments on millimeter wave. Now, I don't foresee any other network to get even close to that percentage. I think AT&T will push. I think this year they'll make a good push. Then next year, once that merger closes, they get even more aggressive. But I think for now, it's very clear that Verizon will be the millimeter wave leader in terms of deployment, percentage of use. That will show in all the speed categories and averages. They'll likely lead. It'll soon, and then especially now more as we get back to somewhat of a normal. Arenas are filling up again. NFL is expecting to go to 100% capacity by the fall. So again, millimeter wave is going to play a big factor, a big part in that. And we'll see where Verizon is even at the end of this year. They're deploying very aggressively. We're in June now. They have 4 or 5 more months to the end of the year. And we'll see what happens. C-band deployments are going at a very fast pace. Millimeter wave is going up. He needs to build, so he has to go through the zoning, the permits. They're doing it. They're grinding. They're doing the hard work. So we'll see where they end up at versus the competition. Like I said, AT&T will be the company to kind of mimic Verizon. Not as aggressive yet, but I think they ramp up. T-Mobile is kind of the oddball. We don't know. They kind of seem to want to be doing their own thing. They say they don't want to do anything above 50,000 small cells. So we will see where they end up at. I do believe sometime in the future, they will likely shift their plans to deploy millimeter wave more aggressive because they're going to start losing the speed battle because Verizon's averages are going to be much faster than theirs. And I think AT&T, if they deploy their millimeter wave at a solid pace, they will also surpass T-Mobile on the speed averages. So let me know what you think about this in the comment section down below. Look forward to reading your comments. If you have been on the channel or you're new to the channel and you have not yet liked, shared, subscribed, make sure you do so. Hit the notification bell so you are notified when I do upload content. Make sure to follow my social media outlets for more updates and interactions. Thanks again for watching. This is Tyrone with Tech Life. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.